Gene splicing. Is it moral? So you're probably wondering, what is gene splicing? Well, gene splicing is the process in which specific fragments of DNA are removed and replaced with other genes. The idea started back in 1972, when Paul Berg, a Stanford University scientist, was the first person to create recombinant DNA molecules using the DNA of a phage and the DNA of an SV40 monkey virus. A year later, Herb Boyer and Stanley Cohen decided to go further to produce the first recombinant DNA organism. This is when gene splicing came into worldwide attention. Since its discovery, scientists have used this technology to modify genes of animal zygotes and human cells. However, after years of deliberation, experimentation using these human embryos at the early stages have finally commenced. In April 2015, a group of Chinese scientists decided to conduct the controversial research. They managed to remove mutant DNA of a human embryo using genome editing tools. This modification eradicated the risk of beta thalassemia, a blood disorder, from developing, which affects almost 100,000 individuals worldwide. The scientists then published their works in an article. It goes through their methods, results, and concludes with an in-depth discussion. They also acknowledge the ethical issues by including their compliance with ethical guidelines. They state that their study conformed to ethical standards of the Helsinki Declaration, the national legislation, and was approved by the Medical and Ethical Committee of the first affiliated hospital, Sun Yat-sen University. They also stated that the tripronuclear zygotes that were used in the study were donated, and that consent forms were also obtained. Despite this, there are still many disputes arising from this controversial issue, despite the scientists abiding by ethical guidelines.
There are many benefits that follow the possibility of genetically engineering the perfect child. Genetic engineering's biggest advantage is that it has the ability to eliminate diseases by implanting genes that are associated with antigen and antiviral proteins. It prevents genetic diseases such as Down syndrome, Alzheimer's, Huntington's disease, and many more, as well as reducing the risk of inherited medical conditions such as obesity, diabetes, cancer, and many others, and also eliminates mitochondrial disorders. Another benefit includes extending the lifespan of humans. This can be achieved through changing a healthy individual's genome in a way it slows down the aging process, which in turn extends the average human life somewhere between 100 to 150 years. In Australia, 2008, 2,188 babies were stillborn. Genetic engineering has the ability to reduce this number significantly, as a genetic defect within a fetus could be treated and even cured before the baby is born.
So we have heard what genetic modification is, and also about the pros or positives of genetic modification gene splicing. But what about the negatives of genetic modification gene splicing? I will start by stating that the ethical principle of autonomy and maleficence are being breached by scientists and parents performing genetic modification. The principle of autonomy is being broken because you are making a decision on behalf of a life. You are detracting or enhancing an embryo's genetic makeup without consent. Which moves on to my next point. The ethical principle of maleficence is being broken simply because an embryo may be discovered that has a 30% chance of a disease embodied in it. That embryo is then discarded. That's a potential life being discarded because of a chance. In 2001, a deaf lesbian couple named Sharon Duchesneau and Candy McCullough sought to have a deaf child. They approached a sperm bank and found that people who suffered from congenital deafness could not be donors. So they found somebody who had 5 generations of inherited deafness and used artificial insemination to conceive a deaf child. Though this is genetic modification through eugenics, modification by passing down genetic makeup, the same principles apply. Should they have been allowed to do this? When scientists are conducting genetic splicing modification on an embryo and they discover a potential genetic abnormality and remove it and replace it with an enhancement gene, scientists cannot guarantee the effectiveness of the gene and also what other characteristics that gene may hold. For example, you may want to increase intelligence in your child, so you find the NR2B gene, which holds the potential for increased intelligence, and you implant it into the embryo. But many genes have more than one effect, which unfortunately might not show itself until after birth. So you could increase your child's intelligence, but you could also increase their anger or even their sensory pain. What about the social implications of having genetically modified children? Genetic modification isn't cheap, so it will create a social standing and intolerance. There will be another class to hold prejudice against. So to add to the list of prejudice such as race, religion, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status, there will be the genetically advanced class. An example of how this will affect society would be two people going for the same job, one genetically modified, the other natural. Resumes read similar, both perform well in the interview, but to say that the interviewee looks a little into the background of both, sees that the natural person's family has a history of heart disease and in fact has a 20% chance of developing it themselves, then sees that the genetically modified person has the potential to develop that same disease, but there is a 0.1% chance that they'll develop it. They would be more inclined to choose the genetically modified person as there is less risk involved. I know that this is all hypothetical, but with the current potential of genetic engineering, this could definitely be a problem in the near future.
As technology advances and this idea of manipulating the genes of our future children to choose what they turn out to be becomes a very real thing, we have to consider more than ever whether or not it's an ethical thing for us to be manipulating human genes. Most argue that by genetically modifying our children, it creates an ethical problem of autonomous rights, whereas the children have no say in whether or not they should be changed, whether it be physically or very slightly internally. And it could also be seen by many people that genetic altering is morally wrong because they view it as not accepting your child the way it was, and the children receiving the changes could also grow up to think this exact same thing and feel very unwanted. Other experts in genetic research say that the work they are doing will have so many benefits in the world, such as potentially eliminating certain hereditary diseases or increasing intelligence, that the risks are massively outweighed by any of the benefits that are created, which means that the largely important principle of beneficence is being followed. Some people rather choose to argue not against the modification of children, but the testing and research that it took to get to this position of being able to change the alleles relating to personality and appearances, and wonder if that is ethical. While the US Department of Energy and National Institutes of Health have devoted 3 to 5% of their annual Human Genome Program budgets towards studying the ethical, legal, and social issues surrounding availability of genetic information. This represents the world's largest bioethics program, which means there is very little to no room for mistake in previous genetic research projects, and we expect the same from any of the more recent studies being conducted.
Gene splicing can be applied to professional practice in many ways. Health and human service professionals are beginning to apply the experiment to advance this field of study. Scientists have been using improved and advanced technology which gives patients the opportunity to modify and create the designer baby. Genetic engineering is mainly aimed at preventing serious inherited diseases being passed on from mother to child before the child is even born. When using gene splicing technology, vaccines have been produced to prevent any negative effects of genetic engineering in humans. Some possible recommendations that should and could be done for genetic engineering are the process of genetic engineering is quite tricky and risky process, and you need to gather a wide variety of information before attempting to engage in the process of genetic engineering. It is also important to assess and prioritize new technology and to respect the rights and morals of individuals. Overall, we believe that there are many advantages and benefits associated with gene splicing. The main advantage is that the patient can eliminate poor genes to effectively prevent diseases that can potentially harm both the mother and child. However, various defects and further harm to the patient could also occur as a result of using gene splicing technology. This new technology can lead to reversible effects and associated consequences. Genetic engineering is also known to be an unethical and natural procedure to create the perfect child. This also goes for the concept of playing God. This is why genetic engineering has become and remains a bioethical issue in healthcare.